The global geopolitical chessboard has erupted. It's not just China. Now Russia and China have united their navies in a daring show of force in Venezuelan waters, launching a direct and undeniable challenge to the United States. This unprecedented military alliance in Washington's own backyard marks a point of no return. It is a calculated affront to U.S. hegemony and an unequivocal signal that a large-scale confrontation is imminent. The whole world holds its breath. Are we on the brink of World War III in the Caribbean? What was once a bilateral tension has now transformed into a tripartite coalition, threatening to reconfigure the global order. Pentagon intelligence reports, corroborated by NATO sources and state-of-the-art satellite analysis, confirm the presence of a combined Russian-Chinese fleet in the Western Atlantic, operating in coordination with Venezuelan armed forces. This naval task force includes the formidable Chinese Type 055 destroyers, Type 054A frigates, and for the first time so explicitly in this region, Russian Slava-class warships and Akula-class nuclear-powered attack submarines. It is not a mere show of force. It is an unequivocal declaration that Moscow and Beijing are willing to protect their strategic interests in Venezuela, whatever the cost, even if it means a direct clash with the U.S. Navy. In response, the U.S. Southern Command has raised its alert level to DEFCON 2, a measure indicating a serious threat and a step closer to war, mobilizing naval and air assets from its strategic bases in Florida, Puerto Rico, and Guantanamo. The Kremlin and Zhongnanhai, with cold and coordinated determination, are testing the limits of Washington's patience and the relevance of the Monroe Doctrine, a pillar of U.S. foreign policy for over 2 centuries, which now faces its most severe and multilateral test. This detailed script will not only narrate events in real time, but will also unravel the complex layers underpinning this unprecedented crisis. We will analyze how this audacious joint provocation was meticulously orchestrated over decades of strategic alliances, infrastructure investments, and influence in Latin America, transforming the region from a mere raw material supplier into a geopolitical chessboard of global proportions. We will investigate the economic, ideological, and strategic motivations driving the audacity of Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, who perceive Venezuela as a golden opportunity to redefine the world order and challenge unipolar hegemony. And crucially, we will evaluate the potentially catastrophic consequences that a single miscalculation, a misinterpreted warning shot, an accidental collision between vessels, or an uncontrolled rhetorical escalation could have for global stability, with the real risk of armed conflict between nuclear powers. Prepare to understand the true reason why Russia and China are challenging the U.S. in Venezuela. It is, in essence, the boldest maneuver on the vast geopolitical chessboard of the 21st century. It is a move that forces Washington to make an existential decision, placing it before an unbearable dilemma: retreat and accept the end of its undisputed primacy in the Western Hemisphere, setting a dangerous precedent for other powers, or advance and risk a direct confrontation with a coalition of rival nuclear powers, with incalculable human and economic costs. Join us in this detailed analysis to unravel the complexities of this critical moment, where rhetoric has materialized into warships, and the drums of a new Cold War resonate louder than ever, now with a chorus of 3 voices. The coordinated arrival of the Russian and Chinese navies in Venezuelan waters is not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a carefully planned power projection strategy by Moscow and Beijing. This move represents a direct provocation to the Monroe Doctrine and Washington's traditional sphere of influence, transforming the Caribbean into a global flashpoint. The presence of state-of-the-art naval assets from the plan and the Russian Navy so close to U.S. shores is a declaration of intent that resonates in the corridors of global power, forcing the U.S. into an unprecedented response. According to naval intelligence analysis and reports from specialized media, the combined task force includes key elements of both nations' blue water fleets. The presence of at least 2 Chinese Type 055 guided missile destroyers, known for their surface combat and anti-air capabilities, has been confirmed. Complementing these, Chinese Type 054A frigates were observed, with advanced anti-submarine capabilities. The inclusion of a Type 075 amphibious assault ship suggests the ability to project ground forces or conduct large-scale logistical support operations, raising the threat level. The novelty and escalation factor are provided by the Russian fleet. The presence of the guided missile cruiser, a Slava-class ship with devastating firepower including anti-ship cruise missiles, has been confirmed. Accompanying it, Gorshkov-class frigates were detected equipped with Caliber missiles. But the greatest concern for the Pentagon is the confirmation of the operation of Akula-class nuclear-powered attack submarines in the region. These submarines, extremely silent and lethal, represent a stealthy and hard-to-detect threat, capable of radically changing the balance of power in a naval conflict. This confluence of military might with cutting-edge technology from two nuclear powers is an unprecedented demonstration of the will to challenge U.S. hegemony in its own backyard. The U.S. response was of unprecedented gravity. The U.S. Southern Command, based in Doral, Florida, raised its alert level to DEFCON 2, a measure indicating a serious threat of war and the need for maximum readiness. Pentagon sources confirmed the mobilization of Carrier Strike Group 8, led by an immense nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. This group includes at least one Ticonderoga-class cruiser and a squadron of Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. Additionally, the presence of Virginia-class fast attack submarines was confirmed, operating stealthily in the region to monitor and, if necessary, neutralize any submarine threat from the coalition. Southcom's official statement, while maintaining a tone of ensuring security and freedom of navigation, contained an unequivocal warning. Any foreign state actor attempting to destabilize the region and support illicit regimes will face a firm and forceful response, with all tools at our disposal. This statement made it clear that Washington would not tolerate the combined military presence as a fait accompli. The tension in the Caribbean was not just a matter of geopolitics. It was a demonstration of raw power, with the three most powerful navies in the world on a potential collision course, raising the stakes to an imminent naval confrontation that could have global repercussions. For the Venezuelan government, the arrival of the Russian and Chinese fleets was a political lifeline and a reaffirmation of its defiant stance, now with unprecedented military backing. Nicolas Maduro publicly thanked the governments of Russia and China, declaring, "Russia and China are our elder brothers, our strategic allies with whom we will build the multipolar future and justice for the peoples of the world." This meticulously orchestrated moment was immediately broadcast during prime time by state television in China and Russia, presented as a symbol of the unbreakable alliance between the three nations against the imperialist and hegemonic aggression of the U.S. and its Western allies. This narrative not only reinforces the legitimacy of Maduro's regime internally but projects the image of Russia and China as responsible global superpowers, willing to directly confront Western power to defend their allies and a new model of global governance. Analysts observe that although Maduro's gestures may seem largely symbolic, they conceal a serious military-political strategy. Russia and China, by openly positioning themselves in defense of Venezuela, are sending a clear message to the world. Their sphere of influence is no longer limited to their respective regions, and they are willing to provoke the U.S. on its own territory, now in a coordinated manner. In direct response to the growing U.S. military presence, Venezuela announced large-scale military exercises, named Bolivarian Shield 2026 on La Orchila Island, in Sucre State and on the eastern coast. These maneuvers, which included the participation of units of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces and the integration of Russian and Chinese air defense systems, were presented as a demonstration of defensive capability and a warning that the country would not be an easy target. The tension in the air was almost palpable, and the world watched with apprehension, aware that any miscalculation could transform this rhetorical and military escalation into a conflict of unpredictable proportions. With each approaching ship, with each more incisive declaration, the Caribbean transformed into a chessboard where moves were calculated, but the consequences uncertain. And in this scenario of uncertainty, the combined Russian-Chinese presence completely altered the dynamics of the game, forcing the U.S. to reevaluate every step in the face of an imminent naval confrontation with global implications. The decision by Russia and China to coordinate a joint naval deployment in Venezuela is not an impulsive act, but a manifestation of their shared ambition to challenge U.S. hegemony and redefine the world order. This strategic move, which openly defies the Monroe Doctrine and Washington's traditional sphere of influence, reveals a new phase in Moscow and Beijing's foreign policy, where non-intervention gives way to an active military presence in regions considered vital for their interests and to test the limits of U.S. primacy. The Russian-Chinese provocation in Venezuela is multifaceted and deeply rooted in their long-term interests. A senior official from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that the naval presence seeks to protect the legitimate interests of our allies in the region and safeguard global stability against external interference. For its part, a spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs reiterated that the joint operation is an exercise of strategic cooperation for peace and security, in strict compliance with international law. However, analysts argue that the main motivation is the protection of massive investments and access to strategic resources, combined with the desire to project power and challenge Washington. Over the past 2 decades, China has invested over $60 billion in Venezuela, primarily in oil and gas projects, in addition to financing critical infrastructure and telecommunication systems. Russia, for its part, has been a key supplier of weaponry and military technology to Venezuela, with agreements exceeding $11 billion, and has maintained an intermittent military presence in the region, including strategic bomber flights and naval visits. These investments are not just financial. They represent a fundamental pillar for China's energy security, the expansion of its global influence, and Russia's ability to project its power beyond its immediate borders. Venezuela, with the world's largest proven oil reserves and a strategic location, is an invaluable partner for both, guaranteeing the supply of vital resources and consolidating their presence in a region traditionally dominated by the United States. The combined military presence also serves as a clear message to Washington. The era of undisputed U.S. primacy in the Western Hemisphere is under threat. Moscow and Beijing seek to establish a multipolar order where their economic and military influence extends globally, challenging the unipolar order. This paradigm shift indicates that both powers are transitioning from a regional defense policy to one of coordinated global expansion. Venezuela, with its vast oil reserves and strategic location, becomes an epicenter of this new strategy, a springboard for Russian and Chinese power projection in the United States' backyard. This joint audacity not only reconfigures the balance of power in the region, but also raises profound questions about the future of global geopolitics and the possibility of a new Cold War, with flashpoints in unexpected places and with an imminent naval confrontation of catastrophic proportions. In Caracas, Russian and Chinese support was met with jubilation and relief. Nicolas Maduro publicly thanked the governments of Russia and China, declaring, "Russia and China are our elder brothers, our strategic allies with whom we will build the multipolar future and justice for the peoples of the world." This meticulously orchestrated moment was immediately broadcast during prime time by state television in China and Russia, presented as a symbol of the unbreakable alliance between the three nations against the imperialist and hegemonic aggression of the U.S. and its Western allies. This narrative not only reinforces the legitimacy of Maduro's regime internally, but projects the image of Russia and China as responsible global superpowers, willing to directly confront Western power to defend their allies and a new model of global governance. Analysts observe that although Maduro's gestures may seem largely symbolic, they conceal a serious military-political strategy. Russia and China, by openly positioning themselves in defense of Venezuela, are sending a clear message to the world. Their sphere of influence is no longer limited to their respective regions, and they are willing to provoke the U.S. on its own territory, now in a coordinated manner. In Washington, the incursion of the Russian and Chinese fleets into the Caribbean was met not with indifference, but with growing alarm that resonated through the halls of power. The Pentagon, in particular, observed with great concern this deployment, which represents a blatant violation of the Monroe Doctrine and a direct challenge to U.S. national security. The question looming over the Capitol was clear: how to respond to this provocation without triggering a catastrophic conflict, now with two nuclear powers aligned. Sources from the National Security Council revealed that, privately, the U.S. administration weighed a scenario of a limited naval blockade or a more aggressive interception. However, National security advisors reportedly warned of the catastrophic consequences if even a single Russian or Chinese warship were damaged. The memory of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis loomed like a specter, reminding everyone of the speed with which a regional crisis can escalate into a global confrontation with nuclear potential. The audacity of Moscow and Beijing, willing for the first time in their history to challenge Washington, not only for their own interests, but in defense of a country in another hemisphere and in a coordinated manner, was something previously considered unthinkable. This paradigm shift indicates that both powers are transitioning from a regional defense policy to one of global expansion, with an imminent naval confrontation. Meanwhile, the crisis reverberated in other global capitals, highlighting deep divisions. Within NATO, the debate was intense and more fractured than ever. In the corridors of Brussels, allies failed to reach a consensus on a unified response. The United Kingdom, Poland, and the Baltic states, aligned with a firmer U.S. stance, insisted on the need for a collective response in case of confrontation with the Russian-Chinese coalition. On the other hand, Germany, France, and Italy adopted an even more cautious approach. A source from the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that Berlin considered it suicidal madness to fight Russia and China over Venezuela. Paris, in turn, proposed an urgent diplomatic mission to mediate between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, seeking a solution that would avoid military escalation. This division within NATO underscored the complexity of the situation and the reluctance of some European powers to get involved in a direct confrontation with two nuclear powers over an issue they considered distant from their immediate interests and with an existential risk. In Latin America, opinions were equally polarized, but the Russian presence added a new layer of complexity. Cuba, Nicaragua, and Bolivia officially expressed their unconditional support for Venezuela and the presence of the Russian and Chinese navies, strengthening ties with Caracas, Moscow, and Beijing. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, on the other hand, issued cautious statements urging de-escalation and dialogue, avoiding explicit partisanship, but with growing concern about the militarization of the region. The Organization of American States, for its part, condemned external interference in the region, a clear allusion to Russia and China, but without directly mentioning the U.S., highlighting the difficulty of regional consensus and paralysis in the face of the magnitude of the threat. This international fragmentation demonstrates the complexity of the new multipolar order, where loyalty and interests intersect in unpredictable ways, especially in the face of such a direct and powerful joint provocation. At the heart of this intricate web of geopolitical and military interests, Venezuela finds itself in a position of extreme vulnerability, yet also unexpected centrality. The nation, grappling with a profound internal crisis, has become the epicenter of a dispute that redefines sovereignty and the global balance of power. The presence of the Russian and Chinese fleets in its waters is not just an act of support but a catalyst for a new world order, where the Caribbean ceases to be an American lake to become a disputed sea, under the triple provocation of Moscow, Beijing, and Caracas. For Nicolas Maduro's government, the combined naval deployment is a reaffirmation of Venezuelan sovereignty in the face of U.S. pressure. However, this help comes at a price. Analysts warn that Venezuela risks being instrumentalized by Russia and China, becoming a pawn in a much larger global power chess game. Economic dependence on Beijing and military dependence on Moscow, now united, could further erode Caracas's autonomy, transforming it into a de facto client state with little capacity for self-determination. The Russian and Chinese presence also raises questions about the future of regional security. What are the implications for neighboring countries like Colombia, Brazil, or the Caribbean nations? The militarization of the Caribbean by external powers could destabilize an already fragile region, increasing the risk of incidents and the proliferation of weaponry. The Monroe Doctrine, though criticized, provided a certain predictability. Its open challenge by Russia and China introduces an era of uncertainty and potential conflict, with an imminent naval confrontation and unpredictable consequences. The future of the Caribbean and global hegemony is uncertain. If Russia and China succeed in establishing a permanent and coordinated military presence in Venezuela, this would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. It would be a monumental strategic victory for Moscow and Beijing, consolidating their status as global superpowers capable of projecting power in any corner of the planet. For the United States, it would represent a historic setback, forcing it to reevaluate its defense strategy and its role as guarantor of regional security in the face of joint provocation and the imminence of a conflict. Venezuela's dilemma is a microcosm of the global dilemma: how smaller nations can navigate a world dominated by superpowers, especially when their strategic location and natural resources become the center of a geopolitical dispute. The arrival of the Russian and Chinese fleets is not just about Venezuela. It is about sovereignty, self-determination, and a country's right to control its own destiny in an increasingly polarized global scenario. It is the sound of the drums of a new Cold War, resonating in the warm waters of the Caribbean, with consequences we cannot yet foresee, and with an imminent naval confrontation of catastrophic proportions. The joint provocation by Russia and China, with the deployment of their warships in Venezuela, to challenge the U.S. marks an undeniable turning point in contemporary history. What was once a competition for influence is now a direct confrontation of wills and military capabilities, with a third major actor. The Caribbean, traditionally a stage for U.S. maneuvers, has become the new epicenter of a struggle for global hegemony, where three superpowers face each other, with the world holding its breath in the face of an imminent naval confrontation. This escalation is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a tectonic shift in the world order. Russia and China, with their growing military and economic might, are no longer content with a regional role. They actively seek to challenge U.S. primacy on all fronts, including its own backyard. The audacity of Moscow and Beijing in Venezuela is a declaration that no region is beyond their reach and that they are willing to take calculated risks to redefine the global balance of power. The implications of this confrontation are vast and far-reaching. For Venezuela, it means greater instrumentalization and increasingly compromised sovereignty. For Latin America, it represents the militarization of its region and the pressure to choose sides in a new multipolar Cold War. For the world, it is the confirmation that the era of unipolarity has ended, and that confrontation between great powers is now a palpable reality, with flashpoints in unexpected places. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: the geopolitical chessboard has changed forever. The presence of Russian and Chinese warships in the Caribbean is a somber reminder that global peace hangs by a thread, and that every move, every decision, can have catastrophic repercussions. Humanity has entered a new and dangerous phase, where a misstep in the Caribbean can lead to an unimaginable catastrophe. To understand the next moves in this deadly chess game, and how they may affect the future of the global economy and peace, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications.